Welcome friends to Family Science Home Edition in the kitchen with Miss Melissa, where we are going to transform normal everyday household items like eggs, milk, vanilla, and sugar into something exciting like vanilla pudding. It is using scientific principles, loosely, but you can also access the recipe on Hoopla Digital. See the show notes for more information about where to find the recipe and how to access it. But specifically, it's in the cookbook called The Young Chef on page 306, called Vanilla Pudding. So I have all the ingredients set out. They're not a ton in the recipe. It calls for milk, sugar, salt, cornstarch, egg yolks, butter, and vanilla extract. So I have the laptop with the recipe on it, and it calls for 2 cups of milk. I have milk right here. Sugar, salt, cornstarch, egg yolks, butter, and vanilla extract. So my first step is to pour out 1 cup of milk, 1/2 cup of sugar, and salt into a saucepan. So, saucepan, the liquid measuring cup for the milk, let's start to the first video. So on here, there are measuring lines. So I'm going to pour it out to this line, which you probably can't read, that says 1 cup. Even though the recipe calls for 2 cups, at this point, you'll need 1. Okay, so 1 cup of milk goes into the saucepan. So I used a liquid measuring cup for that. For the sugar, I will use a dry measuring cup. Hello, kitty. This is Edgar. I'm supposed to use only 1/2 cup of sugar. So I will do that to this dry measuring cup. Pour 1/2 cup of the dry ingredient, in this case sugar. Pour that into the saucepan with the milk. Next, I'm supposed to add a pinch of salt to it. And a pinch is kind of subjective, but some. It was too many, so I poured extra into a container. Now, supposed to put the saucepan with the milk, sugar, and salt onto the stove. Bring it to a boil over medium heat, stirring gently with a wooden spoon. Here I am, stirring gently the milk, sugar, and salt on a saucepan with a wooden spoon. So I'm supposed to bring it to a boil. While that's happening, I can combine some other ingredients into a different pan, different container. Into this bowl, I'm going to add the other cup of, nope. Into that bowl, I am going to measure out the cornstarch. It's backwards, but it is cornstarch. 3 tablespoons. This has a written out 1 tablespoon, but a common abbreviation is TBSP, and the T is capitalized, and the B is included so you can differentiate it from a teaspoon. So tablespoon, TBSP. So 1, 2, 3. I need to go check the milk. It is not boiling. Cornstarch. Another half cup of sugar. So again, the dry measuring cup. Sugar. These in a mess. And the computer went to sleep. So while it's warming up again, the computer's coming online again, I am going to continue to stir the milk. And it just wants to come to a slight boil, not one that makes the milk all frothy and bubbly. Oh, that's awake again. Okay. So I added the cornstarch to the sugar, and I need to start with a whisk, which is this. Just to combine it so we don't get lumps. Cornstarch likes to clump together. It's a thickening agent, so you want to distribute the cornstarch within the sugar so everything is nice and smooth and without lumps. Okay, it's boiling. So it has little bubbles around the edges, but again, it's not bubbling up from the center. So it's hot enough at this point. So I'm going to turn off the heat. So in this bowl, again, is the cornstarch and the sugar, which I have whisked together. So it is smooth and without lumps. And then I'm going to add egg yolks. So I have 2 eggs here that are still in their shells. So that means I need to separate out the whites from the yolks. There are many different ways of doing this. Doesn't matter if you tap gently on the side of a bowl or if you crack the, what's the case of an egg called? Shell. If you crack the shell sharply. I do a sharp crack. So you can see there's a crack there. I'm going to stick my thumbs in the middle and let all the whites on this half of the shell dribble out. Meanwhile, keeping the yolk intact. Then I'm going to transfer the yolk to the other half. Get out as many of the whites as I can and plop the yolks into another container. So there's one there of a yolk, and this is a white. And I will take care of the yolk, the shells later. I'm going to do the same thing again, so I'm going to crack the yolk and crack the shell sharply on the edge of this bowl. Stick my thumbs in there. Separate the 2 halves of the shell. Let the whites drop off out of the shell. Put the yolk into the bowl with the other yolk. So there are 2 yolks in there and 2 whites in there. We don't need the whites, so I'm going to put them over here. Okay, so stirring with the whisk. Add the remaining cup of milk. Liquid measuring cup. Eight ounces or a cup of milk. I am going to stir with the whisk and add the remaining cup of milk. And again, I'm stirring constantly so the cornstarch doesn't clump together, and thus you will more likely have smooth rather than lumpy pudding. Okay, so I combine the cornstarch with the sugar. I stirred with a whisk while adding milk. And now I'm going to add the egg yolks, stirring until the mixture is completely smooth. So the egg yolks are kind of solid. What I want to do is break them up. So you can't tell the difference between the milk and the eggs other than a color change, but there will be no solid bits of egg yolk. So everything's all even textured. I don't know if you can see that. It's gone from being white with just the milk, the cornstarch, and the sugar to having a slight yellowish tinge from the egg yolks. Okay, now the next step is something called tempering the eggs. So the eggs and the milk are cold since they're straight from the fridge, whereas we heated up the milk over here by boiling it. So we want to make sure that we don't curdle the eggs or cook them while we're making pudding, because it's gross, because you would have scrambled eggs in your pudding. So you want to add some of the hot milk to this, the cold cornstarch, sugar, butter, and egg yolk mixture, to raise the temperature of this with the hot milk. So it says to pour about 1/3 of the hot milk into the bowl, stirring continuously with the whisk. So you are tempering the eggs by slowly raising the temperature without shocking them like you do when you make scrambled eggs at home, which is pouring beaten up eggs onto a hot surface, and thus they kind of congeal. You don't want them to congeal. So, since the temperature of the eggs, milk, cornstarch, sugar is now warmer, I can add it slowly to the pan on the stove. And we are going to, by doing this, I'm going to lower the temperature of the stuff on the stove because I'm adding coldish stuff to it while simultaneously increasing the temperature of the stuff in here by adding it to a hot mixture. And the reason why it's important to stir continuously is to prevent lumps and to not have scrambled eggs in your pudding. And the heat from the stove will make the eggs become thicker, which will make the pudding thick instead of runny. You also have the cornstarch in there to make it thick instead of runny. So, okay. We slowly added 1/3 of the hot milk to the bowl, stirring constantly with the whisk. That was tempering the eggs. So then I returned the tempered egg mixture to the hot milk in the saucepan. I'm going to continue cooking, stirring constantly with the whisk until the pudding comes to a boil. So this is the point at which you can it's another point at which you can cook your eggs if you have it on a high heat. So a lower heat, I have it on a 4 out of 10. And you want to slowly make sure that it comes to the right temperature range without curdling the eggs. So I have to wait till the pudding comes to a boil. Let's see, can you see Edgar? There's Edgar. Oh, oh, he left. He wants to go elsewhere. I thought he could entertain you while this pudding slowly comes to a boil. So again, just trying to make the eggs thicker without making them cooked or curdling the milk or anything like that. I've been sewing and I recently nipped my finger pad, hence why I am not holding the whisk with every finger on my hand. So we thought this would be a good way for you to do something like Nailed It, that TV show where people try to cook something new under time constraints and often aren't able to meet the challenge. So this is kind of the library's version of Nailed It, but we're just calling it something else, like, I don't know what it's going to be called. So this recipe is something that you can access with your library card through hoopladigital.com. Look for the cookbook called The Young Chef. Any of you can download it and open it at any time. It is accessible to everyone at all times, with some restrictions, but you can see the website for more details. So it's page 306, vanilla pudding, and you are going to do some science where you're transforming eggs from the shell and in a state where there you can separate out the eggs and the yolks to something that's mixed with cornstarch, milk, sugar, and salt and becomes something else. So that's the science part of it, is you separate out the eggs, add some heat, add some different ingredients, and it just kind of transforms the whole thing into pudding, which is kind of weird. Who thought eggs and milk could make pudding? It's just super easy. This is still kind of thin, so I'm going to continue stirring. So the sciencey part is that you may follow the directions exactly. The milk may boil over, the milk may not come to a boil at all, it might be too cold, so it's an experiment because every day that you cook is a different day and you never know what's going to happen. Like right now, my pudding is not getting very solid. Not solid, but it's not getting any thicker. I'm not terribly a fan of vanilla pudding. There's Kitty. There's a recipe for chocolate pudding in another cookbook that's available through Hoopla. I have the print book itself in a different room, of course, but it's called How to Bake Everything by Mark Bittman. So I might do a chocolate pudding recipe, which has a lot of the same ingredients, but it's missing a few. So you still get the same product, pudding. You're still mixing bunches of regular ingredients together, but not everything is exactly the same. So it's not just adding chocolate chips to the vanilla pudding recipe. It has a completely different, not a completely different, but it has different ingredients in it altogether. Still not thick enough. So I'm going to go get the cookbook. Okay. Oh, that's backwards. It's How to Bake Everything by Mark Bittman. The chocolate pudding recipe is on page 326, and the vanilla pudding recipe is on page 325. So that's thickening up slightly. You can see that it's runny, but it's not pouring out as quickly as milk does. It's a little bit thicker, which is a good sign. Oop, now it's too thick. So I took it off the heat. The recipe doesn't call for straining, but I like to do that. Before I strain the yogurt to get all the cooked bits out of it, I'm going to add vanilla and butter. So I add a tablespoon of unsalted butter and a teaspoon of vanilla, and the teaspoon is the one with TSP as the abbreviation, and it's lowercase t. I don't know if you saw that. First video and all. Okay, so I am now stirring together the pudding, to which I added a teaspoon of vanilla and a tablespoon of unsalted butter. And that is nice and thick and has a wonderful vanilla aroma to it as a result of adding the vanilla extract. And I'm just going to keep stirring using the residual heat from the pan and of the pudding itself until the butter is all melted and everything's nice and mixed together. It says it makes 6 servings. I'm going to have 6 little bowls to put them in. I do have 6 water glasses. Not that they match, but that's what I'm going to use. So, water glass 1. I'm going to strain out the pudding, like I said, just to get out any of the cooked egg bits that are in there. Holy crap, this is 20 minutes. There we have vanilla pudding in a water glass. Here's another water glass. We'll get another scoop of pudding. You see the pudding running out? Kind of hard to see. 2 servings. Third one. So I'll do the rest off camera, but now we have vanilla pudding from a recipe available on hoopla.com through the library using your library card. Good luck and show me what you do and how your pudding turns out. And I hope it works out. If not, you tried. It's science.